What's happening, rugby fans? I hope that you are doing well. Welcome to Rugger United, the podcast where you and I get to dissect some of the big rugby stories that you might have seen on your timeline this past week. And of course, on the agenda today, we will be looking at the United Rugby Championship, the final that will be played at the Loftus Stadium. We'll also be looking at a team that has seen better days, the Blitzboks, who will be out in Monaco this weekend. And then the highlight of South African rugby, the Springboks are back in action for some international rugby action. They will be playing at Twickenham, taking on Wales in their first encounter of the international rugby season. My name is Aaron Masamola, and today I'm joined by a man who absolutely loves his rugby. He's one of the best sporting journalists in the country. His name is Kgotso Sello. Kgotso, my brother, how are you doing?
I'm good, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. You're smiling from ear to ear. Are you smiling because the Springboks are playing this weekend?
Yeah, most definitely, but also the fact that the Bulls have made it to a URC final. They're hosting this time around. Remember the first time they made it to a final, they were the visiting team, but this time around they're hosting. We've got two blockbuster events happening this coming Saturday, so it's a good day for rugby.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Let's start with the URC. You've already started that conversation.
Yeah.
I want to take the conversation back a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's take it back 3 years ago. South African rugby decided, you know what? Let's leave Super Rugby and let's join the teams in the Northern Hemisphere and let's create the United Rugby Championship.
Yeah.
At the time, there were many question marks. At the time, many would have said, maybe this is not a good move. Looking at the progress of South African teams in the last 3 years, would you say this was a good move by Rassie Erasmus and the rest of the people at SA Rugby?
It was a good move, and I think the teams down under, SANZA, which was known then, I think they kind of kicking themselves because they felt that they could do without South African teams. We were getting the smaller share of the pie, and we were the ones who are bringing in the numbers in terms of bums on seats, in terms of eyeballs. And South Africa thought, their bargaining power should be a little bit more at the table, and it was not forthcoming. And then they sought to look for greener pastures, which was, looking northwards towards the European stage. And I think it was a good move. If one looks at it, firstly, the rand-pound exchange. It makes a lot of sense.
Massive
It makes but also secondly, in terms of time zones, when the teams had to travel, having to go either to Argentina or going to Australia or New Zealand, the jet lag, the turnaround time, it was an entire mess, and the South African teams, whenever they had to travel, their travel routine was very elongated because they had to go to Australia and then across the Tasman to New Zealand or vice versa, and then have to come home and then catch a flight back, go to Argentina, and that whole routine was not working. And for us fans, having to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, it was a bit of a logistical nightmare, but nonetheless, because South Africans are South Africans, they love their rugby. We used to get up, we used to give them that support. So I think in terms of, making it easier to transition for the players and for the consumers who actually consume the game, it made a lot of business sense to move towards the European market, and we know how cultured in terms of their sport the Europeans are, and how much they support the traveling fans, so the amount of money that comes into the country from those traveling fans who are very attached to the clubs that they support, so that's only an injection in terms of money into the economy. So from a business point of view, it was a brilliant idea, but from a playing point of view, it was even a better idea, because what you have is two contrasting spheres. You have the southern hemisphere, you have the northern hemisphere, and the different spheres have different type of rugby because of the weather conditions. Up north it's a bit rainy, it's a lot colder, the pitches are wetter, they're heavier, which means there's a bit more focus on, the tighter game, the tighter exchanges, which means your skill set has to change versus what we used to here, where the fields are drier, it's fast running rugby, so we had to adapt. But the beauty of it is the fact that South Africans were able now to play two different kinds of rugby, and And that, only means that the players will develop in terms of their skill set. But not only that, in terms of coaching as well. The coaches have to be a little bit smarter because now the coaches are coaching a little bit different. And in terms of referees as well, how the Northern Hemisphere, it's always a big talking point, how the Northern Hemisphere refs ref, and I think just like that whole all-round, a prize that South Africa was going to get from moving north, was far bigger than trying to stay in the Southern Hemisphere. And the fact that we're playing some of these European countries that are attracting South African players into their clubs, then, it makes it easy for Rassie to kind of have a look at some of these players who he might have to call up into the Springbok. So I think all in all, a great call for South African rugby.
You spoke about the business side there. You spoke about coaches having to improve their game. But I want to talk about the South African teams that have consistently performed so well in the United Rugby Championship. I mean, you look at the first edition of the URC, we had the Bulls and the Stormers playing in the final. Last year, we saw the Stormers taking on Munster. And then this year, we've got the Bulls taking on the Glasgow Warriors in the final. So it means that from a playing perspective, South Africans have always been able to compete. In your opinion, what have we as South African rugby teams done so well to conquer the Northern Hemisphere teams?
Look, let's not paint it like it was all easy. It wasn't.
I mean, according to the books, it looks like it was easy.
It wasn't that easy. I mean, when South Africans started, I remember the first few games, I think the first 3 weeks, I had to do some analysis. And it was a complete nightmare. All the South African teams were getting a drubbing. I mean, the Bulls went to Benetton in Italy, and when people think Italy, they think minnows, and they got a serious hammering. And the list is endless of the teams that got a rude awakening to say, oh no, welcome to Europe. It's a different stage, and we were not only in the URC but also part of the European Champions Cup as well. So things were not as easy. The travel was also not that easy because the guys had to be traveling in economy class. It wasn't, all comfortable. Imagine, these big rugby players from the Blue Bulls, some of them 6'4", 6'5", having to be squashed into economy class up and down. And so we had to adapt. But more than anything, the player depth in this country had been tapped by these European countries. So what you found was that most of the South African teams had very young teams. Because all the experienced guys are getting paid in pounds or euros. They've moved overseas and they're your opponents, So it was very difficult at the beginning because now you have to coach these young guys to, grow up quickly. But the beauty of this competition is that the fact that the pounds came in is the fact that then the South African teams were able to retain to some of the player quality or star power, or start attracting some of the more experienced guys like Marcel Coetzee going down to the Bulls. I remember Steven Kitsoff stayed at the Stormers when there were still rumors of them exiting and all of that. The Sharks got a massive cash injection from an overseas company, and things were happening. So from that point of view, it made life a little bit easier, but also having to learn how to navigate in that space. You have teams like Leinster, when they played against the Bulls last weekend, the guys on the bench alone had over 1,000 caps of club rugby experience. You can't buy that, and that's why Leinster are one of those teams that can play 3 or 4 different teams at a go. They had a completely different squad for the European Cup and used a different squad for the URC and kept rotating like that. So, and I think that was the messaging that we learned, because we used all our guys at one go, and at some point the guys were starting to burn out, or if there's injuries, then it's a bit of a challenge to get the guys through. So that was the messaging from most of the South African coaches, to say we need to tap into our player depth and develop that depth. So I think the South Africans gave themselves a 5-year target to say, let's see, let's contract 60, 70 guys so that we know that we have enough personnel. I mean, rugby rugby is a bruising game, and guys need to be fresh and you need to be able to rotate that, but you also need the quality to do that. So I just think the South African teams were smart in the sense that they put all their eggs in the URC basket instead of trying to challenge for other honors on the European circuit. And the Stormers were smart in terms of making sure that they won the South African Conference. And once you can do that, you know, it makes it easier to host your knockout matches, and it's much easier that way. And I think that's the one thing the Bulls added to their repertoire this year, was the fact that we need to win all our home games in order to make sure that we can host something. And as Jake professed a couple of years ago, they are hosting a final this year.
And it has come at the right time.
Yeah.
But you spoke about the different franchises there, the Stormers, the Bulls. I'd also like to touch on the other teams that we saw. You know, we saw the Sharks, a team with a lot of Springbok players, a team that we thought would easily dominate, you know, given the quality that they have in their squad. Unfortunately, not a solid campaign from them. They did win a European trophy in the Challenge Cup, but not much to write home about. In terms of the Lions, they just missed out on the knockout stages of the URC, and the Stormers were knocked out in the semi-finals, which is not a bad performance from them, given the fact that they were in the final last season. When you look at the bigger picture of what South African teams have been able to achieve in this season in the URC, how would you write that script? Was it a good season, or there's a lot to be desired?
I think it was a very good season, and I think there's building blocks every season when it comes to the South African teams adapting to new life, you know. And if we look at the Sharks, for instance, they had a new coach this year. They had a new director of rugby in Neil Powell. He brought in John Plumtree, former coach as well, former Sharks player himself, back in the early 90s, for those of you who are old enough to remember. And he brought along, you know, some of his coaching staff from New Zealand to try and ignite something. But another thing people need to understand is that when you have Springboks in your setup, it doesn't necessarily mean
automatic success.
Because Springboks have Springbok duty, and sometimes Springboks come back from Springbok duty either injured, or there's a rule that they have to be rested on certain days. Their workload is being managed in order to, you know, to give them life when the test season starts. So, you know, as much as they're there, they're not there, you know. And sometimes more than anything, your Springboks are the guys who kind of are your marketing tool to bring the guys, you know, the fans to the stadiums. But 9 times out of 10, if you look at a guy like Eben Etzebeth, you know, when you look at his record, he's got more test caps than club games, you know, because he's literally, you know, either injured or, you know, or prioritizing the Springboks. I mean, he was at the Stormers since he was a kid. He played for the Ike Tigers in varsity rugby. I mean, that guy lived in the Western Province, and he got 100 caps for the Springboks before 100 caps for the Stormers. So it tells you something, you know. So I just think the Sharks are in a transition phase. I love the addition of a young backline defense coach. Not backline coach, but defense coach, Joey Mungalo. He was
solid coach.
He
also had a solid stint at the Bulls.
He had a solid stint at the Bulls. And I don't think the Bulls have actually quite recovered, even though they might not admit it. They haven't recovered from his loss, because when Joey was there, they were able to beat Leinster in Leinster. For them to be able to make it into that first URC final, and nobody gave them a chance. And if you watch that match, it's through the defense, you know. And when you look at stats, the Bulls had the best defense of the URC season 3 years ago, you know. And you look at them now, they're leaking the most tries, but scoring the most. So I think, you know, they kind of changed departments, but I think, you know, it's a massive loss, but it's a massive gain for the Sharks to have a guy like Joey Mungalo who can transition. He's very good in terms of turning, you know, defense into attack. I mean, he's a former fly half himself, you know, so he loves the attacking part of the game, but, you know, he's using defense in order to add that attacking ability. And we've seen how well the Sharks have transitioned this season. At the beginning, I mean, it takes time for a coach to kind of lay out his philosophy and for the players to be able to, breathe into it and give life to it. But I think with time, I think the Sharks will turn the corner. I mean, they went on to win the EPCR, and they lifted a trophy is a trophy. They're now into a Champions.
A win is a win.
A win is a win.
Ask Manchester United fans, they'll tell you.
Away from home. And now they include into the Champions Cup. So as much as their URC campaign was not the best, firstly, they blooded a lot of new talent. We see in that direction. Guys like Siama Sugu, are getting Springbok call-ups. Guys like Apelele Weekend Special Fasi, he's also taking his game to a new level. He's the guy we remember when he burst onto the scene. So the confidence is there. That back three is absolutely unbelievable. So I think the Sharks is the team to look out for come next season. I think they've got the depth. I think the youngsters are stepping up. They've got the enough depth to be a threat on both the European front and the URC front. So, but looking at the Stormers, I think they were a little bit unlucky this year. There is a team that had a lot of injuries to a lot of top players. Some of their players are leaving at the end of the season. So they're going to need to rebuild again. But I think there's a lovely culture that John Dobson has built there. They play this lovely, attractive rugby,
fast-paced.
the fast-paced.
Nice runs.
I remember him from his days at Ike Tigers as the University of Cape Town coach. And I remember the training kit used to have the signage that says running rugby. So that's the philosophy, that's the Cape Town way of doing things, and they've got the players to do that. You've got your Warwick Halans, your Mani Lebox of this world, all great steppers, Sasha Feinberg Ngomezulu coming into his own, playing around guys like Damien Willems, hot steppers, and they can rip apart any team any day at a whim. But I think the part of the Stormers game that's never been really applauded is their forward play. They've got such fantastic forwards, and they lay a solid foundation. Their scrumming is good. Frans Malherbe, and their lineouts are solid. And I think that's why their backlines have such, so much time on the ball, and they're able to express themselves. They're given such a lovely canvas by the forwards to kind of paint whatever picture they want to paint. So I think it was just an unlucky season for them. I think they'll definitely bounce back next season. But not a bad season at all. And I think at the Lions, we're looking at a team that's literally rebuilding, and they're finding their feet. The youngsters are starting to step up. I like the fact that they brought back some of the guys who were part of that golden generation of the Lions, your Ruan Reyes, and Julian Redland-Hayes being part of the coaching staff. Guy like Jacques Fourie is also part of the coaching staff. Ricardo Laupsha. So those guys who are former Lions themselves, but also former Springboks, they understand the culture. They're bringing back that fierce into the dressing room, and you can tell by some of these historic wins they had. They beat Leinster at Ellis Park.
Which was a big one.
Yeah, Sanelo Nohamba taking his game to a
Sure,
new
he's
level,
been phenomenal
playing
this
9
season.
and 10. Emmanuel Chituka this season. Just been unbelievable. He's now joining his brother at the Sharks, Vincent, but that's going to be a big loss. But there's no shortage of talent at Ellis Park, and I really wish them well this coming season, because they'll do well. Sanelo Nahamba named URC Player of the Season. It just tells you, he's picked for the box now, and we'll see how the rest of the season unfolds for him.
Definitely. Let me put you on the spot. The big final will be played at Loftus Versfeld.
Yeah.
The Bulls taking on the Glasgow Warriors. The Glasgow Warriors, a team that have flown under the radar a little bit. They finished 4th in terms of the log position. I want you to give me a scoreline for the 80 minutes that we'll see at the Loftus Stadium. Who's taking the trophy?
I think the Bulls are going to take the trophy. I think they'll score 40 plus points. I think the Glasgow Warriors will be there and thereabouts in the first half, but altitude
Will be a challenge.
matters, and I just think the Bulls always show up for big games like this. I remember
Especially at home.
I remember one super rugby final against the Chiefs when the Chiefs were red hot that year and they came to Loftus, they copped 60 plus, you know. So I think the travel from Europe, coming down, having to acclimatize, and then having to face a Bulls team with their tails up, playing the type of rugby that they're playing right now, I think they'll be up for it. I don't see the Glasgow Warriors giving the Bulls much of a problem. But I also want to send a shout out to the Glasgow Warriors coach, Franco Smith, who happens to be a South African. You know, I think the South Africans are making their mark not only in terms of player personnel-wise, but our intellectual properties well sought after. You know, globally, we're seeing Jacques Nienaber being part of the Leicester setup. We're seeing, Franco Smith doing his thing here, and you know, it's really great to see that our coaches are being recognized globally, and it just shows that the South African rugby is in a very healthy state.
Definitely. Yeah. Let's shift the conversation quickly to some international rugby.
Yeah.
Before we jump to the Springboks, I want to touch on the Blitzboks, a team that has seen better days, to be honest, a team that has been struggling a little bit. And this weekend in Monaco, they are looking for that opportunity, that final opportunity to make it to the Paris Olympic Games.
Yeah.
What are you predicting for the Blitzboks this weekend? Because that's a team that has got me a little bit nervous at the moment. Can we see them playing at the Olympic Games? Is there a possibility?
Luckily, I'm not a betting man, because these guys are
I need your advice.
These guys are literally blowing hot and cold, and I don't know what kind of Blitzbok team to expect. I know interim coach Philip Snyman has brought in a few of the experienced heads to come back into the team. You know, the likes of Roscoe Speckman are also there, and you know, so just to bring back that
stability
almost,
and that culture, the winning culture.
And I mean, it's their last opportunity to kind of secure a spot for the Olympics. They squandered the opportunity of finishing in the top 4 in the HSBC series. Then they squandered an opportunity to qualify through Africa, and they lost to Kenya. And now this is literally the final opportunity to kind of, so it's all or nothing. They've changed coaches. Sandile Ngcobo, I don't know, I feel for him.
That was quite sad.
But I think it's a topic for another day. It needs its own little segment.
We'll need to dissect that one on its own.
We'll need to unpack it properly. But let's put our faith behind Philip Snyman and the team that is chosen, and hopefully they can make it. You know, sometimes South Africans do well whenever, they are considered
extra pressure.
But also considered underdogs. You know, whenever they're considered underdogs, they always show up. So I think let's just give them that support for that one final push.
Let's back the boys.
Let's
move on to the big boys.
Yeah.
That took us through a nervous 2023 Rugby World Cup.
Yeah.
That quarterfinal, semi-final, and then that final, winning all 3 by just a single point.
Yeah.
The Springboks will be back in action
this
weekend at Twickenham, taking on Wales.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said about the squad in terms of injuries, the players that they don't have.
Yeah.
But it's always a good opportunity for the younger players that have done well in the URC to now put their hand up and say, Coach Rassie, I want to play.
Yeah.
Looking at the squad announcements and the names that have been selected in terms of the 23 players, are you happy with the selection? Are you almost confident that this is almost like a good building block for the rest of the international rugby season that lies ahead?
I think I'm quite confident. I think if one listens to what Rassie Erasmus was saying after he picked the team, he was talking about how when he first took over the Springboks in 2018, we played Wales in the USA. That was our first test before we came down, and we lost that test match, because he kept the bulk of the squad down here for the rugby championship. And he thought that was more important. But with experience, he understands that winning is, as much as blooding new players is important, but winning is also important. And when you look at the spine of the team, it's got all the experienced characters. You've got your Oxen Chairs there. You've got your Vincent Koch at number 3. Your locks are the guys that are Usually there are Franco Mostert, the usual suspects. You've got
Yeben is in there as well.
Yeben is there. You've got your Faf de Klerk at number 9. So when you look down the spine of the team, it's literally the guys who can, pull the team together when the chips are down. And then you have some of the youngsters in the back line. Number 10, Jordan Hendricks, he's had a fantastic season.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that gives him, or skips him ahead in the queue is the fact that he's able to cover 2 positions. He was playing fly half and fullback for the Lions, and then sometimes he was playing center. So when should anything happen within the game, and we need to move him to fullback or move him to center, then he's readily available. And I think that's been one of the things that Rassie Erasmus and his coaching tenure has shown us, is that the number on your back shouldn't really matter. You should be able to do more than one
positions.
More than one, and I think that's the direction where rugby is going. I mean, we saw Grant Williams play wing and then scrum half, and
same with Canan Moody as well.
Canan Moody center wing. Around. So I think the guys who have versatility. If you are versatile, I think you'll be up in the pecking order. But if you're very one-dimensional in the Rassie era, chances of you being picked are far and few between. But just looking at the team, I mean, Feinberg, Ngomezulu on the bench are thoroughly deserved. Fussy weekend special at the back. We spoke about him back in business. So it's a lovely team. Ivan Roos, one of my favorites, and number 8.
8th man.
So I think it's going to be a long day at the office for Wales, and I'm just hoping that we kick off this test season with a win. World number 1s. I saw a joke running on social media where they say South Africa's number 1, the Bulls are number 2, and Ireland are number 3 because we beat Leinster. So hopefully,
always a little bit spicy. Yeah?
So hopefully we can keep that pecking order intact by winning on Saturday. Against Wales, and the Bulls also making sure that they beat Glasgow Warriors.
Definitely. Yeah. I can't let you go without asking you 2 quick questions about the team selection.
Yeah.
Pieter Steph being captain, and also I know that you might be thinking about this as well, but Sia Masuku. A lot of people want him to wear that number 10 jersey. We have to ask this question. Is there an opportunity for him later on during the season? Because we want to see him start in that number 10 jersey.
I know one thing for sure is that Rassie Erasmus, if he has you in your group, you will get game time. But it's not always necessarily when us, the fans, are looking for you to get the game time.
So you say we must relax?
Chill. He's got a plan. He always does.
Okay. In terms of a final scoreline that we will be seeing at Twickenham between the Springboks and Wales, where are you at? I'm sure you're backing the Springboks?
Yeah, Boks 36-10.
36-10.
36-10.
Yo, that's a big difference. But my brother Khotso, thank you so much for joining us on Raga United, and we look forward to having you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Now, you heard Khotso's opinions. I would love to get your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think the Bulls will beat the Glasgow Warriors at the Loftus Stadium this weekend? And also looking at the Blitzboks, do you think they will finally qualify for the Paris Olympic Games? And then also the Springboks playing out at Twickenham. It should be an easy one, at least in my opinion, but you are the person who gets to comment down below and share your opinion. Join us next week again for Raga United.
I saw a cherry and it was red.